My neighbor Jessica called me sobbing at 11 p.m., begging me to watch her house while she rushed to the hospital. Her teenage daughter Emma had been in a car accident and needed emergency surgery. I grabbed my keys and ran across the street to her house in Riverside, California. Her car was already pulling out of the garage as I approached, and she rolled down the window to quickly explain that her ex-boyfriend Derek had been stalking her for months after she got a restraining order. He'd been arrested twice for violating it, but kept getting released on bail. She said he knew she was vulnerable when alone and had been escalating his behavior. Before I could ask any questions, she sped off toward the hospital. The house felt eerily quiet when I let myself in with the spare key. Jessica had left all the lights on, which wasn't like her. I noticed she'd installed new deadbolts on both the front and back doors, along with a security system that was already armed. There were cameras pointing at every entrance, and I could see the monitoring app on her kitchen counter showing live feeds from outside. A thick manila folder sat on the coffee table labeled Derek, evidence file, with photos, text screenshots, and police reports spilling out. The most recent report was dated just 3 days ago when he'd shown up at her workplace demanding to talk. I made myself coffee and tried to focus on the book I'd brought, but every small sound made me check the security feeds. Around midnight, headlights swept across the living room windows as a truck pulled up slowly across the street. Through the camera app, I could see a man in a baseball cap sitting behind the wheel, engine running, just watching the house. My stomach dropped as I realized this had to be Derek. He sat there for nearly 20 minutes before finally driving away, but I knew he'd be back. Jessica had warned me that Derek had keys from when they lived together 2 years ago, before the relationship turned violent. She'd changed all the locks twice, but he was mechanically inclined and had ways of getting inside that she didn't fully understand. The police had found evidence that he'd been entering the house when she was at work, moving things around and going through her personal belongings. Nothing was ever stolen, but items would be in different places, and sometimes he'd leave notes saying he missed her and wanted to work things out. At 1:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Tell Jessica I'm watching. Always watching. You shouldn't be there." I immediately screenshotted it and called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to patrol the area, but with Derek not actually on the property, they couldn't arrest him for sending a text. She advised me to document everything and call 911 if he showed up at the house. Around 2 a.m., I heard what sounded like footsteps on the back deck. The security cameras showed nothing, but the motion sensors kept triggering every few minutes. I turned on all the exterior lights and checked every window and door. Everything was locked tight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there moving just outside the camera angles. I called Jessica at the hospital to update her, and she started crying, saying she was trapped there while Emma was in surgery and couldn't leave. The hospital social worker took the phone and explained that Emma's surgery would take at least 4 more hours. She had internal injuries and they were still assessing the damage. Jessica couldn't abandon her daughter, but she was terrified about me being alone at her house. I assured her I'd be careful and would call police immediately if Derek showed up. The social worker gave me her direct number and said to call if the situation escalated. At 3 a.m., the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Derek standing on the porch holding a bouquet of flowers. He looked disheveled like he'd been drinking and kept swaying slightly. He rang the bell again, then started knocking. "Jessica, I know you're in there. I saw you come home earlier. We need to talk about Emma. I heard about the accident." His voice was slurred but insistent. I stayed completely silent, but Derek must have seen the lights on because he pressed his face against the front window, cupping his hands to see inside. "I know someone's in there. Jessica's car is in the garage. Stop hiding from me." He walked around to the side of the house, testing windows. The security system started beeping as he triggered motion sensors, but he hadn't actually tried to break in yet. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher said units were being sent, but Derek wasn't technically breaking any laws by standing on the porch. I explained about the restraining order and the threatening text, and she said officers would question him when they arrived. In the meantime, I should stay inside and away from windows. Derek came back to the front door and started pounding harder. "Open this door, Jessica. I'm not leaving until we talk. I know you blame me for Emma's accident, but it wasn't my fault. I was following her to make sure she was safe." The way he said it made my blood run cold. Had he been stalking Emma too? Through the security app, I watched Derek walk back to his truck and pull out a large toolbox. He returned to the front door with what looked like a crowbar and started working on the deadbolt. The scraping metal sound was horrifying. I ran upstairs to Jessica's bedroom and barricaded myself in her walk-in closet with my phone. From there, I could still see the security feeds and watch Derek systematically trying to break in. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house as Derek forced the front door open. The security alarm started blaring, but he didn't seem fazed. I could hear him moving through the downstairs, calling Jessica's name and saying he just wanted to talk. He was searching room by room, opening closets and checking behind furniture. The sound of his boots on the hardwood floors was getting closer to the stairs. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but Derek must have heard them too because his voice became more urgent. "Jessica, where are you hiding? The police can't keep us apart forever. We belong together." He started up the stairs and I could track his movement through the security cameras positioned in the hallway. He checked the guest room first, throwing open the closet doors and looking under the bed. Derek tried the master bedroom door, but Jessica had installed a reinforced lock that held firm. He started kicking it, and I could hear the wood frame cracking with each impact. "I know you're in there. Stop playing games." The kicking got more violent, and pieces of the door frame started flying off. Between kicks, he yelled about how Emma's accident was a wake-up call that showed how fragile life was and how they shouldn't waste time being apart. Red and blue lights flashed through the bedroom windows as police arrived. Derek must have seen them because the kicking stopped abruptly. I heard his heavy footsteps running back down the stairs, then the sound of the back door slamming. Through the rear camera, I watched him jump over the fence into the neighbor's yard and disappear into the darkness. 2 officers entered through the broken front door with weapons drawn, calling out that they were police. I yelled from the closet that I was upstairs and safe. They cleared the house room by room before coming to get me. The bedroom door was hanging by one hinge, with wood splinters scattered across the hallway carpet. The officers took photos of everything while I explained what had happened. One officer found Derek's toolbox by the front door, filled with various prying tools and lockpicks. Inside was a notebook with Jessica's daily schedule written out in detail. When she left for work, when she got home, when she went grocery shopping. There were also printed photos of her and Emma that looked like they'd been taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. The level of surveillance was terrifying. The officers put out a BOLO alert for Derek's truck, but explained that he had a head start and knew the neighborhood well. They'd stationed a patrol car outside the house for the rest of the night, but recommended I go somewhere else until Derek was caught. I called Jessica at the hospital to update her, and she broke down completely. Emma was stable after surgery, but would be hospitalized for at least a week. Jessica's sister Rachel arrived from San Diego around 6 a.m. to help with the situation. She took one look at the damage and started making phone calls to a locksmith, a security company, and a lawyer who specialized in stalking cases. Rachel had been urging Jessica to move away from Riverside for months, but Jessica couldn't afford to relocate and didn't want to disrupt Emma's senior year of high school. The locksmith arrived first and spent 2 hours installing commercial-grade deadbolts and reinforcing all the door frames. The security company upgraded the camera system and added motion sensors in the backyard where Derek had been moving around undetected. They also installed panic buttons in the master bedroom and kitchen that would immediately alert police. Derek's truck was found abandoned in a grocery store parking lot about 5 miles away around 8 a.m. Police processed it for evidence and found more disturbing items: zip ties, duct tape, and a baseball bat. There was also a detailed floor plan of Jessica's house with notes about entry points and blind spots in the camera coverage. The evidence suggested Derek had been planning something much worse than just talking. Detective Maria Santos arrived to interview me about everything I'd witnessed. She explained that Derek had been escalating his behavior over the past month, following Jessica to work, showing up at Emma's school, and leaving gifts on their front porch. The restraining order wasn't stopping him because the penalties were too light, just a few days in jail each time before his parents bailed him out. Detective Santos showed me Derek's criminal history on her laptop. 3 domestic violence arrests with previous girlfriends, all dismissed when the women dropped charges after being intimidated. 2 stalking charges that resulted in just probation. A history of violating restraining orders with minimal consequences. She said Derek fit the profile of someone who would eventually become physically violent if not stopped. The detective's phone rang and her face went grim as she listened. Derek had been spotted at the hospital asking about Emma's condition at the information desk. Security had been alerted and escorted him out, but not before he'd managed to get Emma's room number. Jessica was being moved to a secure waiting area, and additional security was posted outside Emma's room. I spent the next day helping Rachel board up the broken front door while we waited for a replacement. We found evidence that Derek had been inside the house multiple times before. Personal photos rearranged, Jessica's underwear drawer disturbed, and a spare house key missing from its hiding spot. The violation of privacy was almost worse than the break-in because it meant he'd been invading their space for months. Emma was conscious and asking about the house when Jessica called that evening. The doctors said she'd make a full recovery but needed several more surgeries over the next few months. Emma broke down when Jessica told her about Derek breaking in, saying she'd been afraid this would happen. She admitted Derek had been following her to school and texting her inappropriate messages that she'd been too scared to report. Detective Santos called with an update. Derek's ex-girlfriend from 2 years ago had come forward after seeing his photo on the news. She provided text messages and photos documenting similar stalking behavior, including Derek breaking into her apartment and threatening her family. This woman had been too afraid to press charges at the time, but was now willing to testify if it would help stop him. The prosecutor's office filed additional charges based on the new evidence: stalking, burglary, possession of burglary tools, and violation of a protective order. Derek's bail was set at $100,000, too high for his parents to pay. Detective Santos said Derek was likely hiding out with friends or sleeping in his truck, becoming more desperate and dangerous as time passed. Rachel insisted on staying at the house until Derek was caught, sleeping in the living room with a baseball bat beside the couch. She'd taken time off work and hired a private security guard to patrol the neighborhood at night. The security company installed floodlights that illuminated the entire backyard, making it impossible for anyone to approach unseen. 2 days later, Derek was spotted at a gas station 10 miles away, caught on security cameras buying energy drinks and cigarettes. The timestamp showed he'd been there at 3 a.m., suggesting he was staying awake all night and sleeping during the day. Police increased patrols in that area and put his photo out to all local businesses. Jessica finally came home from the hospital looking exhausted and defeated. Emma was stable but faced months of physical therapy and counseling. The insurance company was balking at covering all the medical expenses, adding financial stress to an already unbearable situation. Rachel had started a GoFundMe page to help with costs, but Jessica was humiliated by having to ask for charity. That night, motion sensors triggered around midnight, but the cameras showed only shadows moving at the edge of their range. Derek had learned to avoid the monitored areas, but was clearly still watching the house. The security guard found fresh footprints in the backyard garden, right outside Jessica's bedroom window. Someone had been standing there for an extended period, based on how deep the impressions were. Jessica broke down and admitted she was considering dropping the charges against Derek if he'd just leave them alone. The stress was destroying her health, and she couldn't afford the security measures long term. Rachel was furious and threatened to file charges herself if Jessica backed down. They argued until after 2 a.m. about whether confronting Derek or hiding from him was the right approach. The next morning brought terrible news. Derek had been arrested for assault after attacking a convenience store clerk who wouldn't tell him if Jessica had been in recently. The clerk was hospitalized with a broken nose and concussion. Derek was charged with aggravated assault and held without bail pending trial. Detective Santos said this escalation showed Derek was losing control and becoming increasingly violent. Emma was released from the hospital a week later, but needed round-the-clock care. Jessica had to take unpaid leave from work, and the medical bills were overwhelming. Rachel moved in temporarily to help with nursing care and security. The house felt like a fortress with all the new locks and cameras, but Emma was too frightened to sleep alone in her room. The therapist Jessica found for Emma was Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who specialized in trauma counseling for teenagers. During their first session, Emma revealed that Derek had been sending her explicit messages through fake social media accounts for months. She deleted them without telling Jessica because she was embarrassed and thought she could handle it herself. Dr. Hoffman documented everything and said this pattern showed Derek had been escalating toward violence for much longer than anyone realized. Derek's assault trial began 3 weeks later. Jessica had to testify about the stalking and break-in, reliving the trauma in front of a packed courtroom. Derek's lawyer argued that his client was suffering from mental health issues that diminished his responsibility. The prosecutor countered with evidence of Derek's calculated surveillance and planning, showing this wasn't impulsive behavior. The convenience store's security footage was played for the jury, showing Derek's unprovoked attack on the clerk. You could see him losing control when the clerk said he didn't know who Jessica was. Derek picked up a wine bottle and swung it at the clerk's head with obvious intent to cause serious harm. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. During the sentencing hearing, 3 other women came forward to testify about Derek's previous stalking behavior. Sarah Mitchell, a nurse from Phoenix, described how Derek had followed her for 8 months after a brief relationship, leaving dead flowers on her car and sending threatening letters to her workplace. She showed the court photos of her vandalized car windows and the dozens of hang-up calls she'd received at work that forced her to change departments. Amanda Torres, a teacher from San Bernardino, testified about finding Derek hiding in her garage one evening when she came home from work. She described the months of psychological torture that followed, how he would move items in her house to let her know he'd been inside, how he'd watch her classroom from the parking lot during lunch breaks, and how he'd sent explicit photos of himself to her school email address. She had to take a leave of absence and eventually transferred to a different district because the harassment was affecting her ability to teach. Lisa Chen, a college student from UC Riverside, broke down on the witness stand describing how Derek had posted intimate photos of her online after she broke up with him. The photos were accompanied by her personal information, her phone number, class schedule, and dorm room number. She received hundreds of harassing calls and messages from strangers who'd seen the posts. Campus security had to escort her to classes, and she eventually dropped out of school to avoid the humiliation and threats. The prosecution also called Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a forensic psychologist who had studied Derek's case files and interview transcripts. Dr. Martinez testified that Derek showed classic signs of someone with an obsessive personality disorder, combined with antisocial traits that made him extremely dangerous. She explained that Derek's pattern of escalating violence with each relationship suggested he would become more dangerous over time, not less. Derek's mother, Patricia Williams, took the stand on his behalf, pleading for leniency and claiming her son had mental health issues that weren't his fault. She described a difficult childhood where Derek's father had been physically abusive before abandoning the family when Derek was 12. She testified that Derek had been in and out of therapy since his teens but had never found treatment that worked. However, the prosecution countered with evidence that Derek had been offered multiple treatment programs, but had either refused to participate or had been expelled for threatening behavior toward female staff members. A therapist from the county mental health center testified that Derek had explicitly stated he didn't believe his behavior toward women was wrong and had no intention of changing. Derek's defense attorney, Michael Ross, attempted to argue for a reduced sentence based on Derek's troubled background and mental health issues. He presented character witnesses who testified about Derek's skills as a mechanic and his ability to hold down steady employment. Derek's supervisor at the auto repair shop where he'd worked described him as reliable and competent, though he admitted Derek had been fired for making inappropriate comments to female customers. The prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They showed evidence that Derek had used his mechanical skills to disable victims' cars, forcing them to accept rides from him or leaving them stranded in vulnerable situations. They presented testimony from coworkers who described Derek's increasingly erratic behavior and his obsession with tracking his ex-girlfriends through social media and mutual acquaintances. Derek was sentenced to 8 years in prison with no possibility of parole for the first 3 years. The judge called his behavior a systematic campaign of terror against multiple victims and noted his complete lack of remorse. Derek screamed threats at Jessica as he was led away in shackles, proving he remained dangerous even after conviction. His final words were, "This isn't over, Jessica. I'll find you when I get out." The bailiffs had to physically restrain Derek as he lunged toward the gallery where Jessica and Emma were sitting. Security cleared the courtroom while Derek continued shouting that Jessica belonged to him and that no judge could keep them apart. The incident was captured on the court's security cameras and later used as additional evidence of Derek's dangerous mental state. Following the trial, Jessica received a call from Victim Services Coordinator Linda Chen, who explained the various protection programs available to stalking victims. Linda helped Jessica apply for victim compensation funds to cover the costs of relocating and installing security systems. She also connected Jessica with a specialized counselor who had experience with long-term stalking cases and could help both Jessica and Emma process their trauma. The Victim Services Office also arranged for Jessica to meet with other women who had survived similar situations. The support group met weekly at the community center and included women who had dealt with stalkers, abusive ex-partners, and other forms of harassment. Jessica found it incredibly helpful to talk with others who understood the hypervigilance and fear that had become her constant companions. Emma's therapy sessions with Dr. Hoffman revealed the full extent of Derek's psychological manipulation. Through careful questioning, Dr. Hoffman uncovered that Derek had been systematically isolating Emma from her friends by spreading rumors about her at school. He had created fake social media accounts to befriend her classmates, and then shared embarrassing information about Emma that drove people away from her. Dr. Hoffman also discovered that Derek had been using Emma as a way to control Jessica. He would threaten to hurt Emma if Jessica didn't respond to his messages, then claim he was just worried about Emma's safety when confronted. This psychological manipulation had left Emma feeling responsible for her mother's distress and guilty about the family's situation. During one particularly difficult session, Emma revealed that Derek had cornered her at school several months before the break-in. He had trapped her in an empty classroom and told her that he and Jessica were getting back together, but that Emma needed to convince her mother to stop fighting the relationship. When Emma refused and tried to leave, Derek had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises, then warned her not to tell anyone because it would upset Jessica. The school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was called in to discuss the incident. She admitted that Emma had come to her office with bruises on her arm, but Emma had claimed she'd fallen during PE class. Mrs. Rodriguez said she should have followed up more thoroughly, especially given Derek's known presence around the school. The school district implemented new security protocols as a result of the case. Jessica's workplace, Riverside Medical Associates, had also been affected by Derek's stalking behavior. Office manager Susan Thompson testified that Derek had called the office multiple times pretending to be a patient seeking Jessica's schedule. He had also shown up at the building several times, claiming to be delivering flowers or packages. Security cameras showed Derek sitting in his car in the parking lot for hours, watching the entrance. The medical practice had to hire additional security and install new locks after Derek somehow gained access to the building after hours. He had gone through Jessica's desk and patient files, though no medical information appeared to have been stolen. The violation of patient privacy was reported to the state medical board, and Jessica faced scrutiny over the security breach despite being the victim. Dr. James Peterson, Jessica's supervisor at the medical practice, provided a character reference during the victim impact portion of Derek's sentencing. He described Jessica as a dedicated and professional employee whose work had suffered dramatically due to Derek's harassment. He testified that Jessica had numerous days of work due to court appearances and had been visibly distressed and unable to concentrate during the months of stalking. The financial impact of Derek's stalking extended far beyond the immediate security costs. Jessica's car insurance premiums increased after Derek keyed her car multiple times in the medical center parking lot. Her homeowner's insurance also went up due to the multiple break-in attempts and the need for enhanced security systems. The psychological stress had caused Jessica to develop chronic headaches and stomach problems, leading to expensive medical bills not fully covered by her health insurance. Rachel, Jessica's sister, had also suffered financially and professionally from the situation. She had used all her vacation time and sick leave to help Jessica and Emma, forcing her to take unpaid leave that put her own job at risk. Rachel's marriage was strained by the constant stress and the financial burden of helping to pay for security measures and legal fees. The ripple effects of Derek's stalking behavior affected Emma's education significantly. Her grades dropped from A's to C's and D's as the stress made it impossible for her to concentrate. She missed numerous days of school due to court appearances and safety concerns. Her college applications were submitted late because of the chaos in their lives, potentially affecting her scholarship opportunities. Emma's best friend, Maria Gonzalez, testified about how Derek had also targeted her as a way to get information about Emma. Derek had approached Maria at a coffee shop near the school, claiming to be Jessica's boyfriend and asking about Emma's schedule and activities. When Maria refused to provide information, Derek became aggressive and followed her home, terrifying her and her family. The school district implemented new policies as a result of Derek's behavior, including enhanced background checks for anyone seeking information about students and improved communication with local law enforcement about known threats. Principal Anderson testified that the school had to increase security patrols and modify their visitor policies because of Derek's repeated attempts to gain access to Emma. Detective Santos continued investigating Derek's activities and discovered that his stalking behavior went back much further than anyone realized. She found evidence that Derek had been obsessing over Jessica for over a year before they started dating, gathering information about her daily routines and interests through social media and by talking to mutual acquaintances. The investigation revealed that Derek had created multiple fake online profiles to interact with Jessica before their relationship began. He had carefully crafted his approach based on information gathered through these deceptive means, making their initial connection seem like a natural coincidence rather than the calculated manipulation it actually was. Phone records showed that Derek had been calling Jessica's workplace and hanging up for months before they officially met. He had also been driving by her house and Emma's school, learning their schedules and patterns long before Jessica was aware of his interest. This premeditation made his later stalking behavior even more chilling. Derek's computer, seized during his arrest, contained hundreds of photos of Jessica and Emma taken without their knowledge. Many were taken with telephoto lenses from considerable distances, showing Derek had been surveilling them for much longer than they realized. The photos were organized by date and location, showing the methodical nature of his obsession. The computer also contained detailed notes about Jessica's preferences, fears, and vulnerabilities gathered from their brief relationship. Derek had been documenting everything Jessica told him, creating a psychological profile he could use to manipulate and terrorize her more effectively. The level of calculation and planning was disturbing even to experienced investigators. Dr. Martinez, the forensic psychologist, explained that Derek's meticulous documentation and planning indicated he was not suffering from a mental illness that diminished his responsibility. Instead, his behavior showed clear understanding of right and wrong combined with a calculated decision to terrorize his victims for his own gratification. The trial revealed that Derek's parents had been aware of his disturbing behavior toward women for years, but had consistently minimized and enabled it. His mother had helped him get false information about ex-girlfriends' new addresses, and his father had provided money for private investigators to track former partners. Their enabling behavior had allowed Derek's violence to escalate unchecked. The restraining order was extended to 15 years, covering Jessica, Emma, and me as a witness. Derek would be prohibited from contacting any of us directly or through third parties. Violation would result in additional prison time. The prosecutor said they'd also pursue federal charges if Derek crossed state lines to continue stalking after his eventual release. Jessica and Emma decided to move to Oregon to live near Rachel once Emma finished her medical treatment. They couldn't afford to stay in California with all the security expenses and missed work. The house went on the market, but the realtor warned that the publicized break-in might affect the sale price. Every potential buyer had to be told about the violent incident. Emma started having nightmares about Derek escaping from prison and finding them again. She was seeing Dr. Hoffman twice a week and had been diagnosed with PTSD from both the car accident and the stalking. The therapist said Emma blamed herself for not reporting Derek's messages earlier, thinking she could have prevented the escalation. I helped them pack over several weekends, finding more evidence of Derek's violations throughout the house. He'd left notes hidden in books, rearranged photo albums, and even planted a small recording device behind the refrigerator. The police collected everything as evidence for potential additional charges. The depth of his obsession was truly disturbing. The private security company provided escorts when Jessica had to appear in court for various hearings. Derek's parents tried to contact her through intermediaries, claiming their son needed mental health treatment instead of prison. Jessica refused all contact, having learned that engaging with stalkers in any way typically makes the behavior worse. Rachel found Jessica and Emma a rental house in Portland with a security system already installed. The landlord was a retired police officer who understood their situation and agreed to install additional security measures at no extra cost. Jessica got a job at a medical office there, taking a significant pay cut, but prioritizing safety over income. Emma would finish high school online and start college a year later than planned. The disruption to their lives was massive, but they finally felt they could breathe. Portland had victim services organizations that helped them navigate the legal system and find counseling resources. Emma joined a support group for young women who'd experienced stalking, and Jessica connected with other single mothers who'd fled domestic violence situations. 6 months later, Derek was caught with a contraband cell phone in prison, trying to create fake social media accounts to contact Jessica. His sentence was extended by another year, and he was moved to a higher security facility. Prison officials said he'd been obsessing over Jessica in his cell, covering the walls with newspaper clippings about the case and drawing disturbing pictures of her and Emma. The prison psychologist, Dr. Robert Klein, conducted a full evaluation of Derek and concluded that he showed signs of erotomania, a delusional belief that Jessica was in love with him, despite all evidence to the contrary. Dr. Klein's report stated that Derek genuinely believed all of Jessica's attempts to get away from him were tests of his devotion, and that she would eventually realize they belonged together. Jessica called to tell me they were doing well in Oregon. Emma had finished high school online with honors and was accepted to Portland State University with a partial scholarship. They joined a support group for stalking victims and found it helpful to talk with others who understood their experience. Jessica had started dating someone new, a police detective named Marcus, who understood the security precautions they needed to maintain. The house in Riverside finally sold, but for $35,000 less than asking price due to the violent history. Jessica used the proceeds to pay off Emma's medical bills and establish an emergency fund in case they needed to relocate again. She kept one security camera system active and always parked in well-lit areas, but was gradually returning to a more normal life. Detective Santos called with regular updates about Derek's prison behavior. He'd been written up multiple times for harassing female guards and had been caught trying to get personal information about Jessica from a prison counselor. These incidents were documented in case he ever applied for early parole. The prosecutor said Derek's prison record would make early release extremely unlikely. Emma started college the following fall, majoring in criminal justice with plans to work with domestic violence victims. In she said that the experience with Derek had shown her how inadequate the legal system's protection could be, and she wanted to help improve it. Jessica was proud of Emma's resilience and determination to turn trauma into purpose. During Emma's sophomore year, she wrote a research paper on stalking laws that was published in the university's Criminal Justice Journal. The paper analyzed how Derek had exploited loopholes in the legal system and proposed reforms to better protect victims. Her professors were impressed with the depth of her research and encouraged her to pursue graduate school. 2 years later, Derek was attacked by another inmate who'd heard about his stalking conviction. Prison guards found Derek unconscious with severe head injuries, and he spent weeks in the medical ward. Jessica felt conflicted about feeling relieved when she heard the news. Part of her wanted Derek to suffer, as he'd made them suffer, but she also knew that wishing violence on others wasn't healthy for her recovery. The prosecutor's office contacted Jessica about Derek potentially receiving early release for good behavior, despite the prison incidents. They needed Jessica to provide updated victim impact statements and appear at parole hearings if necessary. Jessica was terrified at the thought of Derek getting out early and starting the cycle of stalking again. Emma, now thriving in college, offered to testify at Derek's parole hearings about the long-term impact of his actions. She'd become an advocate for stalking victims and could articulate how Derek's behavior had affected their entire family. The prosecutor said Emma's testimony would be powerful evidence against early release. The prison psychologist reported that Derek showed no signs of rehabilitation and continued to express obsessive thoughts about Jessica. He'd refused all counseling and maintained that his actions were justified because he loved Jessica and was trying to protect her and Emma. This delusional thinking made him unsuitable for early release. Derek's first parole application was denied after Jessica and Emma provided compelling testimony about his ongoing impact on their lives. The parole board cited his lack of remorse, his continued threats, and his prison disciplinary record. Derek would serve his full 8-year sentence before being eligible to apply again. Jessica and Emma had built a new life in Oregon, surrounded by supportive friends and community. Emma graduated college with highest honors and got a job with a victim services organization in Portland. Jessica had married Marcus, the detective, and felt truly safe for the first time in years. They still maintained security precautions, but fear no longer controlled their daily decisions. The victim services organization where Emma worked helped her develop a presentation about stalking that she gave at high schools and colleges throughout Oregon. She shared her story to help other young women recognize warning signs and seek help early. Emma's presentation had reached over 10,000 students by the time Derek's release date approached. 3 months before Derek's scheduled release, Jessica received a letter from the prison system informing her of his upcoming parole hearing. Despite serving his full sentence, Derek would still have to appear before a parole board who would determine his release conditions. Jessica hired a lawyer to represent her interests at the hearing and ensure maximum restrictions were placed on Derek. The parole hearing was held via video conference due to COVID-19 restrictions. Jessica, Emma, and I all provided victim impact statements describing how Derek's actions continued to affect our lives years later. The parole board imposed strict conditions on Derek's release: no contact with any victims, mandatory GPS monitoring for 2 years, weekly check-ins with a parole officer, and mandatory psychological counseling. Derek was released from prison on a cold Tuesday morning in January 2024. Jessica and Emma had moved to a new address the month before, and Jessica had changed jobs again as an additional precaution. They'd also adopted a large German Shepherd named Max, who was trained in personal protection. The dog went everywhere with them and was an excellent early warning system. Within 2 weeks of Derek's release, he violated his parole conditions by attempting to contact Jessica through a fake email account. The parole officer immediately issued a warrant, but Derek had disappeared from his halfway house. A statewide manhunt was launched, and Jessica and Emma were placed under police protection while Derek remained at large. Derek was captured 3 days later, hiding in an abandoned warehouse in Los Angeles, over 1,000 miles from his designated release area. He'd stolen a car and driven to California, apparently planning to find Jessica's old house in Riverside. When police arrested him, they found detailed maps of Oregon and printouts of Jessica's new workplace that he'd somehow obtained online. For violating parole, Derek was sentenced to an additional 3 years in prison. This time, he was classified as a maximum security inmate and placed in solitary confinement for much of his sentence. The prosecutor said Derek's immediate violation of parole showed he remained an extreme danger to Jessica and Emma. The night I spent in that house changed my perspective on personal safety and domestic violence. I'd never understood how stalking could completely upend someone's life until I experienced the terror firsthand. The random threats, the constant vigilance, the feeling that nowhere was truly safe. It was exhausting and traumatic even as a bystander. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been there that night. If Derek had broken in to find Jessica alone and vulnerable while Emma was hospitalized. The thought still gives me nightmares. Having a witness and immediately calling police probably prevented something much worse from occurring. Derek still has 3 years left on his sentence, and Jessica has prepared for the possibility that he'll resume stalking after release. She's documented everything, maintained the restraining order, and built a strong support network in Oregon. Emma has learned self-defense and situational awareness skills that will serve her throughout life. The experience taught me that restraining orders are often just pieces of paper against someone determined to cause harm. Real protection requires community support, financial resources, and constant vigilance. Jessica was lucky to have family who could help her relocate and start over. Many stalking victims don't have those options. Looking back, I'm grateful I was able to help Jessica and Emma during their darkest time. The broken door and damaged house were repairable, but the trauma of being hunted by someone who claimed to love you lingers for years. They've both worked hard to reclaim their lives and not let Derek's obsession define their future. Derek's conviction sent a message that stalking has serious consequences, but only because Jessica had the courage to prosecute despite the risks and difficulties. Too many victims give up when the legal system fails to protect them adequately. Jessica's persistence may have prevented Derek from victimizing other women. Emma is now working on her master's degree in criminal justice while working full-time at the Victim Services Organization. She's become a national speaker on stalking prevention and has testified before the Oregon legislature about strengthening stalking laws. Her advocacy work has helped pass legislation requiring GPS monitoring for all convicted stalkers and mandatory minimum sentences for repeat offenders. Jessica and Marcus bought a house in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland with excellent security features and supportive neighbors. They've hosted barbecues for other families who've experienced domestic violence, creating a community of survivors who look out for each other. Jessica still checks her locks multiple times each night, but she sleeps peacefully, knowing she's surrounded by people who understand and protect her. The security company that helped upgrade Jessica's original house has used their story as a case study for training new technicians. They've developed a specialized protection package for stalking victims that includes panic buttons, hidden cameras, and direct connections to local police departments. The company now donates 1 free security system per month to families fleeing domestic violence. 5 years after that terrifying night, I still live across the street from Jessica's old house in Riverside. The new owners are a young couple with twin boys who play in the same yard where Derek once lurked in the shadows. They don't know the house's history, and I've never felt the need to tell them. Life has moved on, but the memories remain. If you made it to the end of this story, please know that stalking is a serious crime that affects millions of people annually. If you or someone you know is being stalked, document everything, report it to police, and reach out for help from victim services organizations. No one should have to live in fear the way Jessica and Emma did. The house-sitting job I thought would be routine became a life-changing experience that showed me how quickly normal life can turn into a nightmare. Sometimes the most dangerous person is someone who claims to love you but refuses to accept that the relationship is over. Stay safe out there. And remember that there are people and resources available to help when darkness threatens to overwhelm you.